Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. We really appreciate you coming, and more importantly, coming on time. I'm Lori Conlon. I'm the director of the Office of Postdoctoral Services here at the NIH, also the one you get all the emails from, probably. So we're really thrilled to have Anna Post here today to discuss business etiquette. This is one of the, in my estimation, one of my favorite trips on my year since I've been here at the NIH. I've been really excited to bring her on and hear a little bit more about, from an expert's mind, what business etiquette actually is. Anna has a family pedigree of being in the etiquette manners business. She is the great-great-granddaughter of Emily Post, which if any of you, mostly of you in the United States will probably know Emily Post as one of the original gurus of etiquette and manners. Anna spent some time actually here in DC. She worked in the Hill in Senator Leahy's office and also at the Motion Pictures Association. So she understands government. She understands nonprofits. She understands being from an own business perspective now. And she also, like many of us, about a couple of years ago, was wondering exactly what to do next. And she decided to go back home and work with the family business and write books on etiquette, give talks on etiquette, and become our generation's new expert on etiquette. So with no further ado, let's invite Anna to have a nice conversation with us.
How's the sound? How's the mic? Is that coming through for everybody up there pretty well? Okay, great. This is a wonderful space, by the way. I teach all over the country, and I never always know what I'm going to get till I'm there, and this is great that you all have this. The facilities here are very impressive. I never had a chance to visit when I lived in DC. I was here for about 5 years. This is huge, very impressive. So before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to, it's 5 after 9, and I'm scheduled to speak until 11 o'clock. I'd like to reserve the last 10 or 15 minutes or so for question and answer. I would like to invite you, if you have a question or a comment that you feel is really pertinent to the information up here, to raise your hand or shout that out, volunteer it. I'd like for you all to get as much out of this discussion as possible. I'm going to do my very best to make this very fun and entertaining. Etiquette early in the morning is probably not what a lot of you all were thinking was going to be exciting time, but we're going to do our best to have this be a really fun, very relevant conversation to things that may happen for all of you in your business careers or also at your studies here at NIH. And to that end, I would love for you to volunteer questions, comments. If anybody does have to leave early for another obligation, I won't think you're rude if you have to go. I know somebody already mentioned to me that they have to slip out. That's okay, I understand. I would ask if you have cell phones, pagers, Blackberries, things like that. If you do have to have them on because there's a message you must be getting, please just set it to vibrate or silent, and if it's a call, take it outside. And lastly, if you need to use the restroom, excuse yourself for any reason, just go ahead and do it. Don't worry about it. I'd like you all to be comfortable. I won't think it's rude, I promise. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started. As Lori mentioned, my name is Anna Post. I am an author in the etiquette world. I've authored so far a couple of books on wedding etiquette. That happened to be in the slate of publishing. What was up next when I started working was wedding etiquette. I'm also a girl, which helps. We were joking that while my dad, Peter, who is also an author and a spokesperson for the Emily Post Institute, can certainly answer wedding questions, it does look a little bit funny. So I do teach a lot of business etiquette, and at some point we'll begin working on a business etiquette book as well. Next up is entertaining, is in the publishing slate, and then one on, we're currently working on, that manuscript is in, we're working on our big book of etiquette, which we're going to be raffling off at the end of the session. So that's what I do. I'm a writer, which, believe me, I often feel like that means that I work for a nonprofit in the publishing world these days. My business experience here in Washington was about 5 years, mostly working on the Hill, either in Senator Leahy's office or as a lobbyist. So I'm not quite as familiar with some of your language. Lori and I have talked a bit about it, but forgive me if I make a gaffe or if I stumble on a term that you use here. Department head instead of client, something like that. When we spoke about this program, it was with the assumption that not only will this be good advice for you during your time here, but I also think it's going to be good advice, as I understand many of you will be moving out into the professional world that may have a little bit of a different culture, if you will, than what's here at NIH. So that's the approach that I'm coming to it with, just in case I happen to make any errors in translation, if you will, here. The last thing I think that, no, actually I think we'll go ahead and get directly started. With the program this morning, You're going to notice that the title here is Building Successful Relationships. I want to talk about that for just one moment. Many of you probably have wonderful etiquette. I want to say that right off the bat. I think many of you learned how to use forks and knives. We're told to say please and thank you when you were children. Many of you also probably know some much finer points about etiquette as well. I think there may be some things here that will be new for some of you. It will be new for what's new for which person, I think will be different for each of you. And in addition, I think this is very good reinforcement of what we do know. But I want to highlight that for all that the forks and knives are great, both myself and Emily Post, my great-great-grandmother, as Lori mentioned, for anyone who's not familiar, she wrote the classic book on etiquette that we continue to update. She wrote it in 1922. She was very much a woman of her time. She had a wonderful sense of humor. People think she was very stuffy. That's not true. She was a very practical woman. She wasn't interested in rules for the sake of rules, if you will, but for things that made sense and that made other people, put other people at ease. That was one of her biggest concerns. It's one of my biggest concerns. I'm not interested in forcing somebody to adhere to a rule that makes absolutely no sense for the situation that they're in. My overarching goal is building successful relationships, whether it's in business or it's in your personal life. Etiquette, I don't think, happens in a vacuum. I don't think that when you're in a room by yourself, there's much concern whether you're rude or polite. It takes two people for this interaction, for this conversation to start to happen a little bit more. How we react to one another, how we influence each other, the decisions that we choose to make, and how they affect each other. So that's a little bit where the focus is going to be today. I wanted to prep you for that. We're going to talk more about it in a minute, but that title is actually a very carefully chosen title. That's my major goal for the day with all of you. The last comment that I'll make before we get into the direct program is that I do teach American etiquette. May I ask how many people here are not American citizens, are not from the US or plan to live here? So a very healthy amount of you. One, I want to let you know that I do teach, as I said, American etiquette, but I am very, very aware of all of the wonderful traditions in other cultures. Anything here, if you have questions about how being from another culture you might need to integrate or think about your own behavior, whether it needs to change or not, and I don't think it always does, by the way, as we'll talk about in just a minute. But I did want to give that caveat in the beginning that I teach from an American point of view. And the standard, by the way, in business is that it's a when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So when you're in the US, the expectations I'm teaching are there. It doesn't mean it's not still wonderful to be sensitive to another culture and welcome them in the way that is the easiest to help them feel good and to feel comfortable here. So does anybody have any questions on that cultural aspect? Okay, great. Let's go ahead and get started. The Associated Press and Ipsos did a poll on manners a few years ago, and they asked a couple of questions that wound up making my job easier in the end, I can tell you, because these are things that we had talked about as though we knew the answers, and we finally had the statistics to back us up. The first question that they asked is, are Americans ruder today than 20 or 30 years ago? What do you guys think in here? Show of hands. No, not ruder. We're polite. Wow, you guys think we're really great. Are you sure? I'm not sure I agree. You think we're ruder?
Ruder, yes, ruder, no.
Ruder, yes. Do you think we're ruder? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Than we were 20 or 30 years ago? Yes. Okay. About 69% of the respondents on this poll said so. Actually, I can tell you that this is the first time that I haven't had the majority of hands shoot up at that question of yes, are we ruder? I think it's a generational question. I think if you asked the generation before, they would have answered about the same way, the generation before, the same thing. Some of the norms of society change over time. Women don't have chaperones anymore socially. Men and women in business, it's gender neutral nowadays. Men are not really holding the doors for women necessarily the way that they would have before. It doesn't mean you don't do it as a nice gesture, but I'm talking about as a gender divided gesture. You don't see that as much anymore. And when these changes occur, or things fall by the wayside and new things that are jarring, like cell phones, come along, I think that's where people perceive that there's a rudeness. What they knew as a child is changing and moving on, and what I knew as a kid, that was what was right, wasn't it? I think that's where people get this perception, but it's actually a very fluctuating thing, the expectations that we have about how we interact socially with one another, whether it's in our personal lives or in business. That's usually how I'll use the word socially. They also asked the question, on a frequent basis, do you encounter people using their cell phone rudely? I'm sorry, every time I turn, I'm a little away from the mic. I'll try to watch that for you guys. On a frequent basis, What do you guys think? Do you see people using their cell phone rudely? Yes, I'm seeing some eyes roll, okay? 55% of people said this. If you change that to frequent or occasional, the number, by the way, shot up to 89%. Who the 11% are that don't see somebody on a once in a while basis using their cell phone rudely, I have no idea who they are and what they're not noticing, but I think pretty much most of us have seen this at one point or another. The last question that they asked was, have you yourself used your cell phone in a rude or annoying manner in the last couple of months? Anybody? Okay, a few brave souls. I won't take names, I promise. A few brave souls are willing to admit it. You know, without meaning to, it's very possible that I've done it. Because I think that when we talk about rudeness, I don't think that many people out there wake up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to be rude today. That's on my list of things that I'm going to accomplish. I don't think people are actively thinking about it. Have people been rude on purpose when they're angry about something? Sure, I've certainly seen that happen. But in terms of a lot of the rudeness is like, you know, somebody using their cell phone while they're in a client's lobby waiting and they're talking loudly and everybody else has to listen to this conversation about what they're going to have for dinner as they are waiting to do some business with somebody. Or at the grocery store and they're talking about you know, their doctor's appointment in detail and you really just don't want to be hearing this. I don't think those people are doing it to annoy you or to annoy the other people in the room. I think these people are doing it because they're lacking in awareness. They're lacking in perspective. And I think that perspective is the key to the numbers that I see on this slide. It does match up, by the way. About 8% of people saw this. Now, I'm willing to bet that you all have much better math skills than I do. I managed to get through college without ever taking a math course. I'm still not quite sure how I did that. But 55% of people, or even more so, 89%, I don't believe that all of those people are seeing the 8% who are willing to admit, yeah, I've probably done something I shouldn't have done. It doesn't make any sense to me. Again, I think it's a question of perspective. It's much easier to see rudeness or perceived rudeness, or incivility, I think is another word also for rudeness, in other people than it is to see it in ourselves. So awareness and perspective are some words that I'm going to come back to throughout the day. Because just the way I said in the beginning, I think that I have a strong suspicion that everybody in this room has had at least the bare basics of etiquette training. I don't think most of us could survive our daily lives if we didn't. I think it doesn't do us any good if we're not aware of using those good skills that we've been taught to be able to help us have good relationships with the people in our lives. And just to go around doing the thing that is considerate for another person, whether it's going to gain you something or not, by the way. I also think we'll talk about why it can gain you something in business, but I will say that it may sound sort of Pollyanna of me, but I also do think it's worth it for its own sake. But let's there we go. This is a classic example of a question that we deal with at the Emily Post Institute. Like I said, I think these are very livable things for people. We're going to see some more examples coming up of very real-life situations. And this was written into us several years ago. It's been a difficult week. Finally, in an email, we've adjusted it here to be more of a narrative. Finally, in an email, you vent to a friend or a coworker about your boss. The next day, you realize that your friend, your coworker, has sent you and everyone else in your office, including your boss, a reply. So your boss has seen everything that you just dumped to your friend. What would you do in this situation? Would you have your friend send a message asking people to delete this? No. Why? They're going to read it. It's the first thing I'm going to do. I want to go see what was in that email that was so sensational. And by the way, do you all use Outlook here? Is that, yeah, and that's the most common one out in the corporate world. That you'll see that people will have. There is a feature on that has a recall on it. I think many of you probably know that doesn't work the way you think it does. It doesn't go and magically draw that back out of somebody's computer. It just sends a second email saying, please disregard previous email and delete. Again, yeah, right. I'm going to go see what's in there. I don't see that happening at all. Start work on your resume. In part, it's in there for a laugh. I know it's early in the morning. In part, it's in there for a laugh, but I can tell you that I've heard a couple of different horror stories, really colorful. I can't actually even repeat some of the things that were in these emails that people said were really sent, and they were cleaning out their desk by the end of the day. It was a mistake. They didn't mean to do it, but in one case, she was emailing to a friend who was coming to interview at her office. They said, so what's the office like? Tell me about it. And she gave a very candid reply about her boss. But in the end, she said, you know, so long as you can get past him, it's really okay here. And his name was Peter. And she started typing in Peter, and she hit tab, you know, to fill in the rest of the form, and then just hit send. Well, it turns out her boss's name was Peter, too. And it went right to her boss. He read this scathing review of him as a boss, and she was filling up a box by the end of the day, and she was gone. So I don't think it's common, but it is possible that that's going to be a consequence. Try to delete the message from your boss's computer before she sees it. We've actually had somebody, I teach at all different kinds of places, colleges, nonprofits, I teach at major corporations, a lot of finance, a lot of telecom. And we had somebody from an IT department say that they actually raised their hand. We added this in after her. She said, I would go in and delete it. I take care of my boss's emails. I can do this, and she won't ever know. I've got this one covered in the bag. And my dad was actually teaching that session. He said, listen, if you think you can do that, okay, so long as you're willing to accept the consequences, because I do think there's some potential consequences here. How's this going to go wrong? And by the way, when I worked at the MPAA, I could have done this. My boss couldn't use email to save his life. He had me read most of his, preview them, and print the ones that he thought he really needed to see. I probably could have really done this. Why is that a bad idea, even if you could get away with it? Everybody else in the office is reading it too, exactly. Plus, the first mistake here was unintentional. Okay, you shouldn't have done it, but it was an accident. The second one, deliberately going into somebody else's email and doing this, that's a very deliberate, dishonest act. And it's much harder to apologize for something like that than for a mistake that you shouldn't have done, but you can kind of understand how it happened. Not only that, but maybe my boss walks in later on and somebody comes up to her and says, so Sarah, what are you going to do about that email that Anna sent you? That's pretty severe. What email? I don't have an email in my inbox. What are you talking about? Well, yes, you do. Your name was on it. Now you've been found out, and you've got two things to apologize for. So I think that the best is the simplest in the end, always, which is to accept responsibility, apologize for the action, be proactive, going to a manager, not making it their problem to come and find you, but going to them and saying, listen, I made a mistake here. I shouldn't have done this. I apologize. And then the next question, I think, is just as important. How would you like me to handle this? So that it becomes your responsibility to fix this problem, not your boss's. Your boss didn't ask for this problem. It was put upon them. You're coming to them, and by being proactive like this, it does two things. One, for your own sake, it's much harder for somebody to be as punishing on you as they might if they had to come find you when you come hat in hand and say, I'd like to fix this. I talked about building good relationships just a few minutes ago. We obviously don't want to damage one, but if we do, the best thing to do, even if it means falling on our sword a little bit, is to go in and say, I own this, how can I fix it? It's going to get you on the road to recovery the fastest with a manager, with a boss, with a senior executive, whatever it might be. So today's goals, that was just to give you a little bit of a sample. Yes, question up here. Well, oh, excellent point. Preventative medicine. Don't write anything about your boss in an email. We're going to talk in a few minutes about communications, things that should or should not be in an email. That is an excellent point. That being said, I know that we're human and we can fall into this, but case in point, this is a good question of, is something public, is it private? It might be perceived to be private. We'll talk about this in a minute. But in reality, things like email really aren't, especially when it's companies. I'm not sure how it is at NIH, but I can tell you that in all the corporations that I've spoken at, they actually own your emails. Whether you have password protections, what have you, they own those emails and they can see them any old time that they ask their IT folks to pull it up for them. So yes, excellent point that this shouldn't be there in the first place. So today's goal is think before acting. Sounds very kindergarten, doesn't it? Again, like I said, a lot of this is a reminder that one, thinking before we act prevents us from winding up in a situation like this one that we just saw. That's a real, I hear these stories, these anecdotes all the time when I'm teaching about a mistake somebody made and what happened and how they had to resolve it. It's very, very common. We're all human. I'm human. I've had to do things like this before and apologize for something that I did unintentionally. But thinking before we're acting, what's a great example of this? I know that Lori was on you guys to be on time this morning. What's the first thing that happens? And believe me, I remember DC time when I lived here too. Everything was running about 10 minutes late when I was here too. But that being said, it's not always the same out there in other cities or even different people's expectations within Washington. What are the first words out of your mouth when you're late to a meeting? Not one like this, but one where you're actually talking directly to the people in it. Hi, good morning? No, what are your first words? When you're running late, they've started without you. What do you say? I'm sorry. That's not the best first impression to be giving to people, especially perhaps it's a new client coming to do business with you. Maybe it's an associate from another office that you do a lot of work with and they have limited time while they're here. It's not respectful of other people's time, but mostly by thinking before we act, we're able to avoid getting into those problems where we have to then be saying I'm sorry and have to then be doing the recovery. Of course, we're human, we're going to make those mistakes, but what happens when we're not making those mistakes? We get right to the business that we're there to do, that good exchange of information. We can be as impressive as possible, as confident as possible in our work, and that's where our focus can go, and I think that's when we do our best work. That's why I like to invest in good business skills, because I think it brings back to us the chance to do what we're really there to do. It removes all the other distractions that shouldn't take away from that work. Make choices that build relationships. I think I've made that one pretty clear here, but we're going to look at some examples as to how to do that when there might be more than one answer to a question, and you don't have time to put the world on pause and go look in a book that I wrote or think it out, and we have to react right in the moment. We're going to practice a couple of those difficult situations coming up. We're going to figure out how to make the best choice in those that will keep this relationship, this business relationship that you have with somebody going smoothly, the best choice for everybody involved in that, because relationship, as you know, has to be more than one person. So this is about making choices not just for ourselves, but for the entire group and what's best for that. And lastly is to do it sincerely. Sincerity, I think, is a very important key to all of this. And I'll hold off on the analogy for that one. Let's just let that one sit there for a minute. We'll come back to it in a minute. What does etiquette mean to all of you? I want to start to hear from you all just a little bit. You heard Lori sent out her email. You were all coming this morning. You heard the word etiquette. You hadn't met me yet. What did you guys think? What is that word? What words come to mind for you? What associations do you have with the word etiquette? Anybody? Do you know what it is? Generally, it's synonymous with manners. Grandma. Etiquette is grandma. It's okay, I've heard them all. Grandma. Okay, etiquette is grandma. This is something from grandma's day. This is something that I pull out when I go see grandma. This is something older. It's a book on a shelf that we dust off when it's time to do something important, like set the table for the holidays or meet the boyfriend's parents or what have you. Okay, who else? Yes, up here. Sorry, I can't quite hear you. Creating a comfortable environment for the people around you. I like that. I like that a lot. What else? Yes. Being respectful to the people that you're going to be with. Yes, a hand up here. Being proper. Proper is a word that I hear a lot. That's right. What else? Proper can sometimes have a negative association, do you think? Do you think of it as negative or positive or neutral? Neutral? Okay. Being proper. But proper might be something that's a little bit more than our daily self. Do you think that's fair? Sometimes proper is something that we do, okay, it's time to be proper now, rather as something, I mean, the way I think about proper is a little bit stuffy, to be honest. That's the association I have, and this is what I do. Everybody has different ones. It doesn't make that one right or wrong. Any last ones? Yes?
I think it tells you how to act in a situation like at a funeral or like at a wedding.
Okay, how to act in a situation like a funeral or wedding. By the way, those are the two situations I get the most questions about because they do have some rituals to them, but we don't do it every day. We know about it, we've seen it maybe on TV, maybe, you know, we hadn't gone to a lot of weddings growing up or hadn't gone to a lot of funerals growing up, but we know there's some things you do, but we're not quite sure what they are. So maybe we go check up in the book to see so that we know that we're doing the right thing. Why do we want to do the right thing? So that we don't usually offend other people, so that we make other people comfortable. I think those are pretty fair reasons why we want to do this. Now, in business, believe it or not, that might sound nice and cushy, you know, isn't that sweet, but business is tough. It's a hard world. Not really, actually. People take things very, very personally in business. And so being able to make sure that you're not offending anybody is usually a good thing. To move along, this is Emily. This was taken back in the 50s. Those are two of my uncles with her right there. And she said about etiquette, so I've heard your words, these were hers. Whenever two people come together and their behavior affects one another, you have etiquette. So that's a little bit what I've been talking about before, that it kind of takes two people. This is about interactions and how they occur. She also said that etiquette is not some rigid code of manners. It's simply how persons' lives touch one another in any area, any arena, any field. I would add that I think that this can happen whether or not we are in business, in our social lives. I think this can happen if we're walking down the street. Say I'm walking down the street and I'm on a BlackBerry, which thank goodness I don't have. I won't let my office give me one. So I'm walking down the street and I'm on a BlackBerry and it's a crowded sidewalk. And I'm not looking up, I'm not paying attention, and because I'm not paying attention, I force somebody else to step off the street into like a huge pile of slush, or rain, sorry, it's still snowy up in Vermont where I'm from. And but without paying attention, I didn't even meet this person, I never even saw this happen, but I was a little bit rude to this person. They walk off thinking, boy, what a jerk. So it can happen, I think, with any kind of interaction, whether you know the person or not. So etiquette today, how do I think about it? This one's going to be a little bit business speaky. I hope I don't get any groans in the room. But etiquette is the fuel that powers relationships. I think this is what drives our ability to either be successful or to make maybe not the best impression in a relationship. Why do I say this? In business, you're going to be doing job interviews, which we'll talk about at the very end, because I know some of you will be going through those. You're going to be doing job interviews because your resume got you in the door. You're already qualified. They're not going to talk to you if you don't have the skills to do this job. And of course, they want to find out more about those skills to know if you're the best fit for the job. I mean, that makes sense. That's a big part of it. But a large part is also a component of how you represent yourself, how they think that you'll be able to fit into the culture. Will they be able to work well, or is this person going to be a very difficult person? Will they be able to represent us well if I need to send them out to meet with clients? These considerations do come into people's minds, and that's, I think, where etiquette can come in and really set you apart from the crowd, especially right now in this job market. I have to tell you, I don't know if any of you are looking right now. I met with a good friend of mine whose senator lost his election, and he's been looking for a job since November. He told me last night, he just got a job last week, that he'd sent out 61 very serious, individually tailored resumes to jobs. This is beyond the hundreds of other ones that he sent out that were not tailored. He got 2 job interviews. And of those, he got 1 callback, and of that callback, they never even called to tell him whether he got the job or not. He just never heard from them again. That's the kind of environment that we're going through right now. He happened to get a job through someone that he knew another way, where he didn't have to be submitting a resume. But that being said, I'm hearing this case where people are sending out hundreds of resumes. When you do get that chance to interview, when clearly they had a lot of qualified ones, this is a great way to be able to set yourself apart from the crowd, having these skills. Some factors that can influence a relationship. I've been talking about them a lot today. I think that actions are a big part of it. Are people late, for example? That's an action that we can take, a choice that we've made. I think that appearance is a part of it. We're going to talk about image and attire coming up in just a little bit. If I was standing up here in front of you in sweatpants or a frilly dress, you might not be taking me as seriously as if I'd showed up, dressed appropriately for business. Words. Words are a really big factor. In the communications that we make with other people, we send a lot of signals. And it's not just the words we choose, it's how we say them, the inflection that we use with those words. They have a lot of power, especially when they're on the page, perhaps, in an email where you don't have somebody's voice going with it and the tone. We tend to default to the negative. So the bottom line, again, is what I was talking about earlier about focus. When all of these things are working really well and somebody's not distracted by all of it, it can also enhance your ability to make a good impression on someone, and then you can get to the work. I don't think that people should do all this stuff just because they should do it. I think they should do it so that the work they're there to be doing can be what's on the table and can be the focus. So let's talk a little bit about how I define etiquette much more specifically. Etiquette to me is sort of 2 different things. It's the manners I was talking about, knives and forks, etc., and how we use those, pretty set things. And it's also principles. So let's just divide this up quickly here for a moment. I think that manners, the way that somebody mentioned up here about weddings and funerals, they tell us what to do in a given situation. It's almost like a handbook for how to kind of get through your day. When I do this, you'll do that. For example, for a handshake, if I come up to this gentleman right here and I put out my hand to shake your hand, don't worry, mine are washed. Okay, we shook hands, right? I'm going to put out my hand to him and he's not going to shake mine back. Hi, it's nice to meet you. That's interesting. About half the people I do that with can't help it. As I sit there looking at them, they're like, oh, geez, this is really weird. I've got to put it out. Because it's such a socially ingrained behavior. This is an example of a manner that we do. We know what to expect. And when it didn't happen, it was awkward, and all the focus went right there. And there we are shaking hands. Wonderful. Okay, principles help us to figure out how to interact when there is no manner. These are much stickier situations. We'll look at a few more specific examples in just a minute where the volume of emails that we get at the Emily Post Institute from people asking us questions, etiquette questions that are very particular to a situational moment. We have 1 year ago, we had a data bank of over 60,000 unique questions that had come into us. Some of them were minutely different, but they were different. We can't possibly begin to answer all of those in books. It's not possible. We have 20 books and we don't even come close to it as of right now. So how do we know how to act? How do we know to feel that we've done the right thing in those situations? I think that's where the principles of etiquette will help us out a little bit. I'm going to define those on the next slide. One last thing between the manners and the principles. Just to throw this up, I think that manners are time sensitive. I was mentioning earlier that they vary, I think, generation to generation, that they change, the things we deal with. Emily didn't have Twitter. She didn't have Facebook. She didn't have cell phones to be dealing with. This is new stuff. Principles, I think, how we choose to do these things, the underlying values, I think are much more timeless. I also think that they cross boundaries. In business, you'll hear a lot the example of shaking hands versus bowing to someone, perhaps, if you were in Asia. The idea here is that the manner, what we do is different. Whether I shook someone's hand if I'm visiting in an Asian country, or if I had been instructed that I ought to bow to them instead, that's different. Is that what's really important about the action? It's important to be respectful to that culture, yes. But the idea of greeting someone, taking that moment to respectfully acknowledge an introduction and a greeting for the first time, that's what's cross-cultural. That underlying value is much more timeless. How we choose to treat them. I heard somebody talk about respect or being considerate for the whole group up here. I don't know if you all were reading ahead or not, but these are two of the three principles that Emily Post talked a lot about back in 1922. I think it's why she was so successful. I think people heard some truth in her words, things that were timeless. Whether or not they were rich or poor, American or immigrant, whether they were familiar with these things before or not, I think they really read something that resonated in them. That these were the criteria that she used for treating other people. It's the criteria that I try to use every day in my life, and it's also the criteria that I use when I help other people to answer their questions. And you know, I do a lot of television appearances, and people will ask me things off the fly that weren't planned, and I've never felt stumped when that happens. I mean, I do this all the time, so my head's right in this mode, but I've never felt stumped because by being able to make sure I'm satisfying these three things, I don't think I'm ever going to give a wrong answer or an answer that somebody else would disagree with. I think these are pretty fundamental. To be a little bit more specific, I think the consideration is being able to have some empathy for another person's situation. How might something be affecting another person, that awareness, that perspective that we were talking about earlier in the morning? Respect, there's a lot of definitions, by the way, that I'll accept for these. The one that I want to use is choosing to act in a way that builds a relationship, rather than is destructive to it, or maybe just negligent of it. I don't think it's always an active negative. It might be just negligent, I just wasn't paying attention, I didn't care. I didn't care to bother, to worry about it. But I think it's how the choices we make and how they're going to be affecting other people when we put that into action. Lastly, I think that honesty is being sincere. It's being truthful. I think it's being genuine in our intentions and our actions with other people. On the social side, I like to tell people that I don't think everybody, for example, it's benevolent honesty. I don't think everyone needs to know they have a bad haircut. That's not what I'm saying. I think that there's other ways to be diplomatic about things like that, because you want to be considerate of somebody's feelings in that case. But I think this is a great example to come back to the sincerity that I wanted to put off for just a moment. DC is the perfect town for this. I usually like to throw this question out. I'm always curious around the country what I'll get. The sincerity is the key, because there are folks out there who will sound considerate and they will sound respectful, but we still don't buy it. You know, we're not stupid people. Why don't we buy it? Because we feel like underneath it all, I don't believe what you're telling me. Who's a group of people like that? Politicians. I'll also hear lawyers. Back when Enron was going on, we heard CEOs. That was the perception at the time. Right now, I think it's fair to say that many people wouldn't think that the folks at AIG were very considerate or very respectful. Very hot topic right now. So I think that's the underlying factor. That's the underlying piece that I think really makes all of these things work. Etiquette in action, I think you're going to find, reflects the goals that we had today. I know they're very simplistic when we looked at them earlier, but what we're really asking people to do is to live etiquette. I don't think it's something that we pull out. I don't think grandma's a wrong association, but I don't think it's something that we pull out just for special occasions. Or, oh, I need to brush up or be something different today than I normally am. I think it's something much more, relaxed than that. And I also think it's something that's much more prevalent throughout our life and all the daily different types of interactions that we do. Just that general desire to be considerate and to enjoy the time that we spend with other people. or to make a good impression in business on people, to make that effort, I think does matter to a lot of us. And you'll find it, I think, as we go through the program in more areas of your life than you already realize are there. I want to talk for a minute about a 5-step process that we work with, that we work with clients and that we work with groups like yours on solving. I said there are going to be times when you'll have a situation where you can't run to a book to answer a question, per se. You have to come up with an answer on the fly. It's that moment where you're like, this is what we should do. I hope that was right. That's what you're thinking. This is a little process of problem solving. It's a different way of looking at a very basic problem solving process, more through the lens of etiquette. This is going to be familiar. You want to start by applying consideration to a situation. What does that mean? Remember what I said, how is someone affected? So first you've got to identify who's involved in this, that this is more than just about ourselves and the choice that's best for us. Who else is affected here by what's going on? And you'll find in just a moment that it's sometimes more people than you realize. Begin by developing a solution. This is common problem solving. What are some different things, whether they're right or wrong? That's not what's at stake here. Just what are a couple of options, ways that I can handle this? Apply respect. Okay, what the heck does that mean? Apply respect. That's like when kids are little and they do something that the parent doesn't like and the parent looks at them and says, you show me some respect. I'm 6. What does that mean? I have no idea what that means. I think it means that you show that you value the other person and that you value how something might be affecting that other person. So for me, when I look at this question, I think about it as when I'm applying respect, I take a look at those solutions I just developed and I say, okay, how does this affect the different people that are involved in this situation? How is this outcome going to play out for each person in each of these situations that I just developed, each of these solutions that I just came up with? Applying honesty, I think is pretty basic here. Or look honestly maybe is a better way of putting this. Honesty can be a harsh word because the corollary is that somebody's lying, and I don't like thinking about it in those terms. Look honestly, what's the best one here? What's the best one here, not just for me, but what's the best solution here for the entire group to have a good outcome? And lastly, if necessary, refine a response, basic part of problem solving. So let's take a look at, this example I absolutely love. Usually when I teach this, there's a slide on each one of these steps. 1, we're pressed for time. 2, I knew you all had handouts. And I kind of want to, there's a lot of things that come up with this question, and I want to see how we walk through this one. I've seen this happen in business on occasion. I've seen people play this one out. We actually had a woman call us up in tears one day because her boss had gotten very upset with her for not shaking someone's hand and had said, you know, I need you here for the moment, but honestly, I can't have you represent my company like this. I mean, in essence, basically saying, if I didn't need you so badly, I'd probably fire you right now. He was so offended that she had upset a client by not shaking their hand. At a meeting, you notice a person sneeze into his hands. 5 minutes later, your boss brings the person over to introduce him to you. He extends his hand to shake hands. What do you do? Now, at NIH, I'm sure you're probably more health conscious, perhaps, or at least that's an assumption I would make, right or wrong, than other people. So you may shoot right to the correct answer, but I want to walk us through the problem because it's a great example. What might you guys do? What are some of the things that you might do in this situation? And remember, this is on the fly. This is in the moment. You don't have time to do this whole process, which is why we're going to practice it now to get us in the mindset. We're going to do just a couple of these. Yes? You'd shake the hand. Why? Because it's better for you to take one for the team and shake that hand and make a good impression than worry about if you're going to get sick or if it's going to be nasty to touch that hand, right? Okay. Okay, what would you do right here? Shake it and wash your hands after. That's the right answer, but I'm going to tell you that, believe it or not, about half the time when I teach this, the room never gets to that. I have to bring them there. They don't get there. So whether or not you all went there or not, there's some reasons why we're going to walk through this one. But I'll tell you right now that that I think is the right answer. I think it's the best for everybody, but we'll see why. You had your hand up right here. Does someone else have a hand up, or was it the same answer? Same answer. Okay, would anybody have done anything else? Would anybody have refused to shake the hand? You know the 2 that I get the absolute most? Oh, I'm sorry, I have a cold. I don't want to get you sick. That's what I hear. That's the #1 answer that I hear the most out and about. What's the other? The other one that I hear a little bit less is, oh, you know, I'm sorry, I don't shake hands. Well, okay, what's wrong with that one? You better not have ever shaken somebody's hand before. You better not ever shake somebody's hand again in front of your boss. And the cold one, your boss is sitting there saying, you're healthy as a horse. What are you talking about? You're not sick. What was that? If you're sick, why are you out and about at a business function? We have a really strict rule in our office. If anybody even so much as sneezes, you're not supposed to be around because we all travel so much around the country. I'm on the road, and our other authors are on the road so much that we're always passing colds between each other. So if you're sick, you shouldn't even be there in the first place. So these are all some different solutions. Let's take a look back at step 1 for a moment. Who's affected by this situation? Your boss, the client, you are all affected.
Anybody that might be there that they are uncomfortable.
Anybody else who might be watching who's made uncomfortable by this situation or witnesses this? There's one more.
The company.
Thank you. The company. The company is also affected. This has to do with reputation as well. In business, it is not just you. It is you plus one all the time, and that plus one is your company. In my case, my computer bag up there has Emily Post logo embroidered on it. Whether that's there or not, it's with you the whole time that's part of that association. And the thing is that even if Emily Post per se as the company might not have approved of my action, that name's right there with me and it's tied whether we like it or not. So those are the folks who are all affected by this. We just talked about a couple of different solutions. This solution that you had up here where you just shake the hand. So how does that affect each person? Your company's reputation's intact, you shook the hand, the client's happy. He doesn't know anything was going on. He may not have even known that he sneezed in his hand. Sometimes people just do that, they're not even paying any attention. Lack of awareness, there you go again. And in addition, your boss is happy because you represented him well. That's great. What about you? Not so great for you. You don't want to get sick. I think that etiquette is also about having respect for yourself, which is why I like the refinement in this case, that you then go wash your hands and take care of yourself. That's why we like teaching this one, because there's such a good refinement at the end for the way that people tend to walk through it. We sort of sped through that process right there because I think you guys are on the page with me, and as I mentioned, we are limited on time today. But I do want to walk through this process with 2 more questions that I do with groups when I have a full day to work with them. You're making a, does anyone have any questions on that before I move on? Yes?
So, someone said shake the hand and wash your hands afterwards. What if you have to shake hands with other people as well? I mean, I might have
Great question.
and I know I should wash my hands, but I can pass it along to other people who didn't see me sneezing, and they didn't see me shake hands with you.
That is an excellent question. No one has ever given me that follow-up before. I know what I would do right now. I can tell you what I would do. Does anybody have a solution they'd like to volunteer? Terrific question, by the way.
Carry some Purell.
Carry some Purell? Because now there's another entity involved. When we said who's affected by this, your mind just went to exactly the right place. What about if I have to go shake more hands? I might be then getting them sick inadvertently. I don't want to pass that along. I'm sure that's you know, like the most kindergarten level of bioethics, but there you go. I mean, that's essentially what it is, right? So what else would you do if you didn't want to just like pull out the Purell? Because that might embarrass somebody, couldn't it? I mean, let's talk about possible effects. The question of is that respectful? That question in this equation is respectful for yourself because now you're not going to get sick. It's respectful for these folks down the line over here. They're not going to get sick. But it might not make a very good impression on the person in between. Oh, I just shook your hand. Let me wipe that right back off with that Purell. Let me get rid of that. Okay, yuck, done with that. You could leave that impression, very likely, even though it's being respectful here. I personally, yeah, up here. Yes. In this case, what I might do, this one I don't love it because it's slightly awkward and it places a little bit of awkwardness on me, but I think it's worth swallowing it in this case to say when you're walking up to then fake a sneeze. Right after you talk to that guy, fake a sneeze and say, excuse me, let me wash up, I'm going to come right back to meet you. That's what I would do. You just shook this guy's hand that was all gross and now somebody's walking up to you. You could do it beforehand. And then go to the bathroom and do it. I don't like it because I think it's a little dishonest. You didn't have to sneeze. But I think it's the only way to get through it without then getting other people sick. If you're not worried about it. If you're like, oh, well, we're just in it and we'll just all have to hope for the best. That is another possible answer. I mean, sometimes the ability to worry about these things to death becomes overwhelming to the point where it's like, you know what, this is life, we'll have to take our chances. Because the awkwardness of me departing to go wash my hands may be more than the situation can bear. And I could see both of those depending on how severe you thought the outcome was. And by the way, we're talking analogously about other situations too, not just the sneeze. I think that's when you're going to have to use your good judgment and weigh, because there are some cases where there isn't a right answer. I could see either one of those depending on how serious of a business person was in front of me. If I'm like, excuse me, one moment, I have to go wash up, they might think that's just so bizarre. Besides the fact that we're all out and about in daily lives and all the other things that we touch, who knows when we might have gotten germs. So you will have to weigh some of those questions as you go through, but that's a terrific follow-up. Does anyone have any questions or disagree with the sort of assessment I just gave you, the two options that you may have to weigh? And at that point, you'll just have to judge which is better for the situation and for you, which just feels more natural. Because remember, we have to be genuine as well in this. And if it feels so forced to go wash your hands, it may distract more from the situation than is really necessary. You guys feel good about it? This probably is not what you thought you were going to get this morning, isn't it? Okay. Oops, sorry. This question right here. You're making a presentation to a client group, and one of the members of the committee starts asking overbearing questions and behaving antagonistically towards you. Okay, this is a little bit more serious than a handshake. And it's a very real situation. I've found myself as a presenter in this. If somebody challenges what I'm saying, it's very rare. I've only had it happen once or twice where somebody really challenged something and was upset. It was over tipping, by the way. It was a former waiter. Yeah.
This is a very common situation.
I would imagine it is. That was one of the reasons I chose. I have tons of these I can pick from. It was why I chose it. I would imagine that this may happen for some of you here. And imagine, too, in a client group, I'm sure that there's some stakes involved. Being right doesn't always matter in this situation if we're not able to communicate it to the other person. If they're not hearing it and they're getting this upset, we're distracting from what's going on. It can be very awkward for you, for the people in the, ooh, I'm doing the problem for you. You tell me, who's affected by this? Let's walk through it. Sorry.
Oh, I wasn't going to say who's affected.
Sure, what was your comment instead then?
I was going to say, in that situation, I'd probably try to answer if there was an immediate content and then ask if they could wait until the end.
Till the end.
Lose your focus.
That's great.
You could, like, hash it out.
Sure. That's called parking lot theory, by the way. That's usually what you'll hear it referred to if people choose to give it a name. And I like that. I want to come back to you in just one moment. What was your solution over here?
I would say that whatever the person says is a good point, an interesting point, I understand the concern, or I'll give them, the person some kind of understanding to his position.
You'll throw them a bone. You'll say that there's something here. You said three things. You said you tell them that's a good point, it's an interesting point, I appreciate your concern. I like the second two. There's a small thing that could be wrong with the first one, telling them it's a good point. It might not be a good point, for one thing, and the rest of the audience might not, they might look at you and say, why did you tell them that's a good point? It's not. You should be refuting that. The rest of the audience might then, I think that you chose your words not thinking about that part of it, but you get the idea that there's other people affected. Your reputation's on the line too. We're going to see that in the next question. I like your solution right there. How about tell me why you got to that solution? Like, walk us through the problem. So who's affected by this situation right here?
You are, your boss, and everyone in the room.
Everybody in the room? Yep. And then there's always that plus one, the company is out there, is also always affected by it. Okay, so with all these people affected, you can't, much as you might want to, make sure that everybody in the room understands that you're right. And by the way, this sounds easy until you're in the moment and you know that you're right, you're the one here speaking to people, you can start to feel a little defensive, a little heated. And that's sort of a key element in this, is that's when we ourselves, as the proverbial presenter, can start to lose a little bit of perspective on the situation and sort of not want to be neutral anymore, not want to make the gracious comment of, okay, I see your concerns here, thank you. And sometimes those people will ride right over you and say, no, this is just wrong. You need to see it, don't you see this? And they keep coming at you. It's when these things get heated, and it does happen, not infrequently. And that's why I like the idea of saying, I appreciate your concerns. It might be something like, in the interest of time, i.e. respect for everybody, I'd like to come back to them afterwards, especially if these comments aren't pertinent to the rest of the group anymore. Somebody might be off on a tangent that has nothing to do with the agenda at hand. It's very distracting to everybody else, which is why I like the idea of addressing that concern so you're still being respectful to what's going on while still maintaining control over the situation. It's not just to move the time along, it's to show that you are in control, that you're a competent person. These are the different ways that it can reflect on your reputation, totally irrespective of whether or not you're right, they're right, what the situation is. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add to this? We are going through these a little more quickly than I normally walk through them, but I do feel that you're grasping the concept here, which is many of the new hires that I work with never get to the right, we have to walk stage by stage to the right answer, but I'm sensing from you all that you get this, is that correct? If not, I can walk through the steps with you if you'd like.
I mean, in a situation where someone's more senior to you and you're presenting like to the CEO of the company,
okay,
and they're the one that starts attacking you.
Great
Sometimes
point.
You just have to suck it up, I think, and just remain as calm as possible. This actually happened to me recently. The CEO of a big organization, I'm presenting something, and they were just in a bad mood. So they were just very negative the whole time. I mean, you can't very well say, all right, we're just going to move on. Or
Great
we're just going
point.
to table this for later because they're in charge.
What's your name?
I'm Kristen.
Kristen. Okay. Kristen?
Krista.
Krista. Could everybody hear Krista? Okay. Krista was saying that this happened to her recently with a CEO of a company where you couldn't just parking lot this person. You couldn't put him over here. What do you do? This is the head honcho who's here to get this report. He's paying the bills, or he could be the one paying the bills if you get the job or get the client. He's the whole reason that you're here, and he's not agreeing with it. And Krista's saying that in that case, you might have to take the heat because it's changing the equation a little bit.
I mean, what's the best way? Just try to remain as calm as possible, acknowledge them, answer their questions.
Try to remain as calm as possible. What it might be, perhaps if they're demanding things that you don't have a ready answer to right there, perhaps they're demanding more statistics. In that case, you don't park the question.
That was the exact case.
Was that it? You didn't have the statistic. You didn't have the statistics there with you. In that case, you may have to say, I don't have those statistics. I will provide those for you after the meeting, or I will provide those for you tomorrow, whatever the case may be, and then follow up on that action that's left hanging out there. That's an entirely likely possibility. So in Krista's situation, how one of these people in this situation was affected was drastically different, and it changed the outcome. The point here is that there's not necessarily one right answer. This is why having awareness of who's affected and how it might be happening, ticking through those things quickly in your head as you weigh your options, is very, very important to getting that nuanced right answer. And when you do that, you'll handle the situation well, and you'll be looking like you know what you're doing. You'll be looking very impressive to other people. Even when something went wrong, if you can handle it when it went wrong, that looks good. We're not talking wrong here like sending a bad email. We're talking wrong like a genuine, you had no idea they were going to ask for these statistics. It's not even like you weren't prepared. By being able to handle anything that comes up well, that will be impressive to others. It will reflect well on you and on your company. Everybody good with this question? Yes.
Well, I just have a question when you said new hires, as a young person. How do you handle, let's say you're a young person and you know you're right, and an older person is, and they're in a better position and yada yada, you have to, quote, respect them.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle that, let's say, if perhaps you're lacking respect for that person?
So you just think this person's an idiot, they're wrong, you're younger, you know right. Am I repeating this correct? That you know that you're in the right. You may very well be in the right, but if this person's not hearing that, through whether it's because you're not able to communicate it, which is in part your fault, or if you're not able to communicate that you're right, and they're just not hearing it no matter how many different ways you try to show it to them, the idea here is that you two aren't the only people in this equation, that you have a room full of others where now it's become this very back and forth between you two. And the idea is to set that aside until later with the idea of saying, I understand that we're not, I understand that I'm not explaining this correctly to you. That might be a gracious way of saying it, even if you are explaining it correctly. That might be a gracious way of saying, if we could, let me answer this question in a little bit more depth afterwards, because I can tell that we need to move on for the interest of time, but this is important, and I'd like to make sure that we're clear on this afterwards. And then ask the rest of the crowd, does anybody else have questions on this? Because then maybe you do need to stay there. Maybe the rest of the group really does need to be working on this problem. If everybody else is like, no, we get it, it's just this guy who doesn't get it, no matter how senior he is, then you can say, okay, in the interest of time, I'd like to move on. Let's talk afterwards so that we can finish this conversation. Finish this conversation. That's a great way of being neutral and not saying, I'm right, you're wrong, who's wrong. We're just going to finish this conversation afterwards. And then it's not about how right you are or how wrong they are or how they're not hearing you. It's about moving on, which is what's going to be best for the rest of the group that's here and for your own reputation and ability to handle that situation well and not have that snag come up. That's a good clarification. So with that said, I'll practice my own advice. Does anybody else have a question on this one before I move on to the next one? Nope? Okay. You witness your colleague give a horrible presentation at your client's office. Afterward, while you're gathering your things to leave, he or she says to you, "I think it went great, don't you?" What would you do? So they were the point person for this. Or maybe you were speaking together and you're just cringing every time they open their mouth. They're just not on point. They're not on the page. Who's affected? Let's start there again. You.
The person that's speaking.
The person that's speaking.
The people that are on the audience of the presentation.
Yep.
And your company.
Your company. And why am I asking who's affected here? You're not in front of an audience. It's just the two of you talking. It's just the two of you speaking here. And so maybe it's your company's reputation too, and the people who heard you in the presentation room. Where are you in this question?
Well,
location, where, I mean, literally, where are you? You're still at the client's office. So there may be people around you hearing you answer this question. Okay, so that's everybody who's involved. What might you do in this situation? So a couple of different solutions, responses, that's step 2. What might you do? Hand? I wasn't sure if you were raising your hand. Oh, sorry, you were pointing. Oh, so I'm sorry, your hand over here.
I would respond in a manner that works well for me. I would first point out the positive, the highlights,
great.
the things I did went well. Then I would point out, but perhaps you could take a better look at presenting this particular item this particular way.
Okay, so sort of the praise concern. I think we've all heard this one before, the praise concern. Or sometimes there's 3 steps, you know, praise, concern, follow up. Yes?
I would say let's hear the feedback from the client.
Let's hear the feedback from the client. So neutral, let's just hold on here. So we'll just, another version of parking lot, we'll just hold on to this until a little bit later. Okay, I like that. Let's wait till we hear back from the client. Okay, what else? Anybody? Anything else you would do? Yes?
I think I would talk it through them at a later time, so it's another version of the parking lot, but I think I would offer some.
Great, so you would talk it through with them a little bit later. Okay, great. So I like these 3 options. Let's talk about those for a second. Let's look at, so the question of respect, step 3, you know, the way that we're defining it today, is to take a look at how these different situations affect the people that we just mentioned. Praise and concern I like a lot. I think it's a terrific technique when you have to offer critique to people. My only question would be, is on the client site the right place to critique someone?
If you're just speaking to one another and you're speaking in a low voice, that should kind of eliminate someone overhearing.
Okay.
You can always pull them aside where there is less traffic.
Okay, so
Immediate feedback is very important.
okay, your name, sorry?
I'm
Amy. Amy thinks that immediate feedback is important, but to use a low voice. That might be your modification here, that we're going to use a low voice because we're on the client site. Because how could that look if you're critiquing a colleague in front of your clients? Not so good. We're not on the same page. It's also something that usually in management style, what this gentleman up here in the back mentioned, would be to do it at a later time, which I love the praise concern, and I love that you are modifying your voice so that it's not in the moment. Most of the time, HR, for example, will recommend, and I can tell you that I myself will recommend, not doing it right there on the client site. But I do think that giving a little bit of praise right then is good. You know, find something in that we can say that's good about it. Say, yes, I think you did a great job illuminating X, Y, Z. You know, let's talk more about it when we get back to the office. I like that a little bit better than let's wait to see what the client thinks, because then you're not actually answering the person at all. They were looking for some praise. They went fishing for it, and now you're leaving them just a little bit cold if you don't give them any praise. And as Amy said, they're looking for feedback right there in the moment. So I like being able to answer a little bit of praise, but I do prefer waiting to do the concern until you're back somewhere else, because even with a low voice, it can look like a serious conversation, and when that concern is conveyed, that person may not take it well. And if they look upset at all or answer back and maybe they're not lowering their own voice, it can look contentious in front of a client, which is not a good impression to be giving. The other thing that I think is a really interesting equation in this one is a little bit of follow-up. So let's say that we decide that the best thing to do here is to say, I think you did a great job on X, Y, Z. Let's talk more about it back at the office. And you pack up and you go. Why might it be important not to just say, you did a good job, yeah, okay, let's go, and just do the critique later on? Why is it important to say that you want to talk more about it? Because when you're on that site, if there is a client listening and they had concerns about it, you're affected in this situation too. The client might wonder if you were able to perceive that there was a problem here. And by saying, I'd like to chat more about that, you cover that base. If I just said to my colleague, Dawn, who scheduled this, say we were here and co-presenting, and I said that to Dawn, I said, Dawn, I think it went really well, and Lori thought it was awful. Lori might have thought, boy, Dawn didn't know how to do her job. I'm gonna have to talk to Anna about that. Anna thinks that was great. That wasn't great. What's wrong with these people? That's the perception that can be left behind. And then there is the follow-up, by the way, to all of this, which is to then go and have that conversation where praise and concern is exactly the right approach to be taking with that person. There's one final step. Okay, so you've said everything you had to say to keep it nice and tight on the client site. You've taken care of your critique back there. What else has to happen? Who else is involved in this situation? The client who saw a bad presentation. They're still out there with a bad presentation, a bad taste in their mouth about how this went. You're going to have to follow up with them as well. In that case, you don't throw your colleague under the bus and say, hey, I'd love to come in and talk to you because, I know that Jim wasn't getting across the other day. Let me come in. That doesn't seem very loyal. It doesn't seem like you're part of a good team. It shows that there's maybe some division within your office, some question about quality. Instead, what I would do would be to call up and say, listen, we went over some things. I'd like to ask if there was anything that you were concerned about, some points, because there's a few things I'd like to go over again if you have a little bit of time. There's a couple other things I'd like to mention and a few things I'd like to review with you if you have a little time, and to see if you have any questions. And that way, you show that one, there's some things you'd like to recover, as in maybe tacitly you got that they needed to hear something else. And two, you do open it up to see what their impression of the situation was so that you can address any direct concerns that they might like to make to you to put it behind you. So I like this question a lot because of kind of what comes down the road with it as well, the actions that you might need to take to make sure that your own company's reputation, not to mention yours, and your chance at getting this business are taken care of. Question over here.
Yeah, what if he says something totally wrong during the presentation? Should you stand up and just try to correct him immediately? Because that
Good question.
looks very bad.
The question, for those of you who may not have been able to hear, was what happens if the person you're co-presenting with says something that's actually just flat out incorrect in the middle of the presentation? This is a great example of you're going to have to judge how egregious was this. If this is just so egregious that it's flat out wrong and you've got to say something, you might step in and say, Jim, I think you're actually thinking about the numbers from 2006. In 2007, the number was blah, 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 blah. Just wanted to get in there. Because people make small mistakes like that all the time, and that's usually okay to correct. If he's going off on a long tangent about the whole philosophy of your company and he's wrong, that might be something to clarify later rather than basically saying, Jim doesn't know anything about what he's talking about here right now in the moment, because then you're embarrassing Jim, you're getting into it, the focus goes to that conversation. Maybe Jim thinks he's right and now you're in it in front of the client who figures you should have all this stuff down before you're there. That one, that might be the redo meeting, essentially, that we're talking about here, where it's just all going wrong. But one specific fact, sure, I think that's fine. I would usually give people the benefit of the doubt with that one and try to make it a soft correction, if you will. If I could, I think the number is actually 2,000, whatever it might be in that, and then just be discreet and move right back on, just to correct that one. Yes, question up here.
This happens frequently, I think, in science, where bosses don't pay for their students.
Sure.
Have you any advice for the person who's speaking?
Sorry, did I hear you correctly? You said that this happens a lot in science where bosses jump in and speak for the student. Right. And if you're the student and this isn't what you like, you tell me, what's the culture? I mean, sometimes this is a question of culture. If this is just the way that it is in the science world, that your boss at any point might come in and restate what you're saying, is that just simply a norm that stinks but is part of the job? In the corporate world, it's a little bit different. A boss usually wouldn't be doing that. In many cases, you wouldn't be presenting in the first place if the boss had that much to say about it. Let's put it that way. But students, this is often a learning situation. So the boss is coming in to correct. Is that just part of, I'm genuinely curious, this isn't a rhetorical question, is that part of your culture here?
Depends on the boss.
Depends on the boss.
There's some of them that let you ride your show. There's some of them that want to still run the show.
My bet is that that may just be part of the fact that you got that boss, and that's something that you may not be able to do anything about in that case, because they're senior to you, and you would have to tell me if in your culture here, your corporate culture, so to speak, you have any recourse of having that kind of conversation with him where you say, you know, John, today I'd really like to fly solo. Maybe that's a way that you say it to him. Or, you know, you might be saying something like, Sarah, I just wanted to talk with you. I noticed that you correct me a lot. Can you talk with me a little bit to get, you know, can you coach me? Is there something that you're seeing that's going on a lot that I could correct so that this doesn't have to happen? Those could be two different approaches that I could see. If this person is receptive to it, if you feel it's appropriate to the relationship, and I actually can't judge that one for you, you're going to have to judge it for yourself on a case-by-case situational basis. But those are the kinds of things that I might ask if I thought it was appropriate. It might be a situation where it's just not at all, and you take your lumps, so to speak. Which isn't fun, and I sympathize, but I can tell you in the corporate world that's a lot less likely, because usually if your boss wants to talk that badly, they're not going to let you run the meeting anyway. So that might get a little bit better maybe in another corporate culture, if you will. That's been my perception anyway. But I sympathize, that doesn't sound fun when you're excited to talk about it. Does anyone have any last questions here? We're running just a few minutes behind, but I've loved the conversation. I want to keep us going though so that you all can get out of here on time. Okay, let's head on to the next. This is sort of just a little bit of a follow-up. Dealing with difficult people. We've clearly had a couple situations with that this morning, and I think many of you can see how that might apply here with some of the situations that come up for you. Stay calm. Avoid anger. Remember I mentioned that getting heated about it, it sounds easy right here in the room. Oh, that's so obvious, of course. And then you're in the moment and you're thinking, no, but I really am right. If I just say it one more time, maybe then they'll get it and everybody will know that I'm right about this. When you get heated about it, it can get a little bit harder, and that's sometimes when we say things that we regret or just let the situation run on longer than necessary. The corollary, I think, to that is sticking to facts. It's hard to argue and get heated when you are sticking to facts. Now, usually I can say that and not be refuted at all, but I would imagine in the scientific world, sometimes facts are in dispute. And so I think that there might be a little bit more of a mix between the first and second point up here. Remembering that even when you do dispute facts, to stay more neutral to the ultimate question at hand, maybe is a way that I'll phrase that for this group here. Steer clear of personal comments. I think that one's fair no matter what kind of culture you're within in the business world. That is just completely, I mean, talk about distraction. Because as soon as you make a personal comment, well, you know, Jorge, you always say that. That becomes a personal comment about Jorge and how he handles something. And when you've done that, any other good argument you might be making goes out the window, and the attention goes to the unfairness of that personal comment. That's why those definitely have no place. Besides, this is just unprofessional in appearance. Ask for the other person's perspective, opinion, or reiterate, I think, is another really great way to possibly find out where the miscommunication lies. So what you're telling me is ba 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 ba, that's how you're hearing it. They may say back, no, 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 I meant this instead. It can really illuminate a sticking point to be able to do that. The same thing to ask them to clarify a position or an opinion. Let's see, where are we? Propose your solution, be willing to negotiate. I think this is very, very common. This can sometimes be more interpersonal issues as well, rather than just something that's factual in a meeting that's going on. Seeking closure that's a solution that other people have bought into. Just simply saying, maybe you're at work and you go over to a colleague and say, you know, Lizzie, I needed that report. Sorry, my sister's name is Lizzie. That sounds like a little kid's name. Let me pull a different one. Matt, I needed that report. 2 days ago, you need to get it on my desk by noon. I've got to have it. And you walk off. Well, whether Matt should have been doing it or not, if he didn't do it or he doesn't agree, maybe he says, no, that report was for somebody else, but you just walk off, you may not be getting your report by noon, so that doesn't help you out very much. So seeking some closure, and then using the principles to guide you that we've been talking about. And I would also add, I think we'll see this on our very last slide, I think that those serve you well, regardless of what other people think. I had somebody in an interview recently say, yeah, but come on, don't nice guys just finish last? This isn't just about being nice, or, you know, isn't that just a fun extra when we can do it and it's sweet, but really we've got work to be doing here. Instead, I think that you can do both. I think that you can be aggressive. I think that you can be demanding. You can be motivated. You can be very clear about what you want in a situation and still satisfy all of this. And I think when you do those things all together, you are probably going to be a person who's going very, very far in your career. To be able to be all of those things together, I think is what leads to some of the most successful people. So let's get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty. We've been talking about applying these principles of etiquette for quite a while now, but there are some really good manners to know that are out there, and you're going to see the two intertwined here for about the next 35 minutes or so. And to that end, I'll also add that one of the reasons that I think knowing the manners side of this is important, I think it's pretty clear to all of you why I think that the principles are important. We've just been discussing that. With the manners side of things, why should it still matter how to use a fork or this or that? This isn't the Victorian age. This isn't Edith Wharton's day anymore. We all kind of know that that's not what's really important, that it's our content, what we say, that's so much more important. Well, in many cases, yes. But there's also a lot of cases where you never know how somebody might be judging you. And judgment is a word that's a very harsh word, but I think it's only fair that I let you know that that's how it works in the business world. Many of you may already feel this way. If there's anybody who severely disagrees, I'm always happy to hear about it. It's an interesting conversation I've been having with people lately. But essentially, to me, when I talk about judgment, in the world of etiquette, I think that judging another person harshly because they've been wrong or trying to show them the error of their ways when they make a mistake, I think that's very poor etiquette. I want to make that really clear about the word judgment and put that to bed. I don't think that that's a way that we should treat one another. It's this funny little inverse proportion, like telling somebody, showing them how wrong they've been and making them feel badly about it is actually terrible etiquette. Even if they're wrong, it doesn't matter. It's not a very gracious way to behave with another person. However, I will say that you never know what somebody's expectations of you might be and how they might judge you if you don't meet those. For example, if you are younger in business and you are meeting with a client who is quite a bit older, that client may have much more formal expectations of how you will conduct yourself, and if you fail to meet those, they may not be very impressed whether or not you had good things to say or not. That's what I'm talking about here when I talk about judgment. I will also say that regardless of just not wanting to offend anybody or to be judged poorly by them, I also think that it helps us to be confident when we can walk into any situation and know how to behave. We mentioned earlier how to behave in society at things like weddings or funerals. What about if you're sent to meet with a client or a delegation coming in from another country that you're there to sort of host for the evening, and or actually let's not use another country because the cultural expectations would be different. From another region, maybe they're flying in from the West Coast. These are folks you really want to impress. This is a big deal. You're nervous about this. You go into dinner, you don't want to be worrying about what fork to use or what to do when the check comes, whether how expensive of a bottle of wine it would be appropriate to order, what you might do if the situation arises at the table and you're the host and people look to you. To be able to be confident in those types of situations, again, I think will serve you very, very well. That's one of the reasons I think it's worthwhile to invest in the manners as well, even when at the end of the day, I really don't care what fork you use. I'll tell you that right now. So long as you use one, I'm not very, very worried about it. Doing what makes sense to a situation I think is important. If you ever had to choose, I'd always rather that you're treating the other people at the table or in the room well, rather than worrying about adhering to a sticky finer point of etiquette. So I wanted to let you know where my priorities with it lie, but why I think it's worthwhile to invest in these things as well. So with that said, let's take a look at communications. We're going to run through these. Be aware if it's public or private. As we said this morning, you probably shouldn't be sending an email venting about your boss because of the different ways that might come back to bite you. to? What if even somebody just read that email and left it up on their computer screen and walked off to get a cup of coffee? Your boss comes by to drop something and sees it. I mean, you shouldn't read someone else's computer screen, but that could be what happens. So there's a lot of reasons to adhere to this one for whether it's public or private, but this extends beyond email too. We saw the example of a conversation, even just with a colleague. Should that be had in a client site? Is this the appropriate location? Same thing with phone calls. Is this phone call actually private? Are there other people around who might be hearing me? Proofread, as I mentioned, focus tends to go to mistakes, and you don't want that to be what you're remembered for. I think that's pretty simple. They reflect on you and your employer. If I had walked in this morning and you guys were a little bit tough, I mean, that's a glaring typo, but you don't have a place name like Deloitte & Touche, you know, a tax company that I work with, where it might be a little bit easier to misspell the name. That one's pretty glaring, but you also note that there's no S on Institute. Lori and I were talking about this morning. You know, I always triple check my client's name, one, for my own sake, so that when you walk in, I have it correct. I think that's important. But two, so that I can then come up with an error for here. And I actually did it, and I thought, National Institute of Health. How on earth could anybody not know what that is? And I still Googled it, went on the website, and saw that it's actually institutes with an S. So small example, but it was worth my doing, even though I thought I knew there was no way I could have been wrong on that one. Turns out I was. Lastly, you can't salvage or hide the poor ones. We've already mentioned that you can't recall the email that you send out, but the same could go with voicemail too. If you left a voicemail for someone, it might not actually be wrong, but maybe you just weren't very tidy and you weren't very comprehensive in getting your information, and you have to call back to correct yourself on voicemail a couple of times. You know, when I get 3 voicemails from somebody saying, no, sorry, actually what I meant on the last email was XYZ, I think the person looks a little bit sloppy when that happens. Let's talk specifically about email for a moment. This was a real situation that happened back in 2001. This is a real company in here. This appeared in the New York Times back in April. We're getting less than 40 hours of work from a large number of our KC, that's Kansas City, based employees. The parking lot is sparsely used at 8 a.m., likewise at 5 p.m. As managers, you either do not know what your employees are doing or you do not care. You have created expectations on the work effort which allowed this to happen inside Cerner, creating a very unhealthy environment. In either case, you have a problem and you will fix it or I will replace you. You have 2 weeks. Tick-tock. Ouch. Their stock plummeted. This was, I'm sorry, I can't remember right now if it was the president or the CEO. I think it was actually the president of the company who did this. Their job was on the line with the board of directors as this email started getting forwarded, again, seemed private, was not, was getting forwarded around. It became such a scandal that it wound up in the New York Times. Very severe example, clearly. But it highlights a couple of important things. One is tone. 2 is how angry this person is. In the president of a company, if I was a board member, I might be concerned to see a president who was this hot-tempered, that they would shoot something off like this without thinking more about it. Lastly, because I had somebody disagree with me on that, and they say, no, this guy is absolutely right. And you know what? He is. That's the kicker in all of this. He was absolutely right, and his job wound up on the line. But the way he chose to do it was what failed for him, and how we choose to do things. We'll see a lot in communications, and through some more things coming up here, can make the difference. It doesn't matter, you know, as you were saying up here, but I'm right and this person who's older was wrong. That may be the case, but how we choose to communicate this or get through the situation will leave a big impression with the people around us. And this guy chose a really poor method. What I did say to this one person who said, you know what, that's an appropriate email. These folks were messing up and they needed to be told so. There's one thing that he does that I disapprove of, whether or not you agree with the tone, which I personally don't. I think it's a little too hot-headed, this whole TikTok thing. That's very dramatic. I'm not very impressed by that personally, or at least I'm not favorably impressed. You have a problem and you will fix it or I will replace you. That's a big threat. That's somebody's job. That doesn't get handled in an email that impersonally. You have a meeting, either one-on-one if it's a single manager, or you have a meeting with the whole group and do it privately there instead to discuss your concerns and that, you know, this needs to be fixed or else this may have to happen. You don't dump a message like that on somebody in an email, not as the head of a company. So I wanted to talk to you about why this email was so sensational and how tone conveys so much, and the choices that we make, even when we are right, have a lot to do with it. So a couple of quick tips for email communications. Let it simmer. I think we clearly saw that here. I would also say that if it's something very, very complex, and maybe you are speaking with someone who's not as familiar with the issue, maybe in your case, if it's a very in-depth technical question of science, and now you're out in the professional world dealing with a client who's just a salesperson, and you need to translate this into layperson language for them, you may want to reread that email from beginning to end. If I didn't know anything about this, would I be able to follow the thread of this email and get good information out of it? So it could be for things that are angry, it could be for things that are very complicated. Your subject line is your first impression. I'm not going to hammer this one home, except to say do have one and don't have typos in it. Beyond that, it's pretty simple here. That's the first impression someone sees when they go to open an email. Because quite frequently in business, we've never even met the person that we work with. I only just met Lori today, but we've been talking for a couple of months. So that was the only impression she was getting of me, was my emails. Be conscious of your voice. All caps, as we just saw, really is yelling, unless that's what you mean to do. I would avoid it. Tone, text message speak. We just talked about tone a good bit in the last one. Text message speak. What I mean here is, all the abbreviations, emoticons, things like that. If you're using these with somebody, a colleague you work with a lot, and you're both okay with it, I'm completely cool. Go right ahead. Emily Post approved. That's just fine. I'm talking more about situations where you may not know the person you're working with. You may not know how that might be judged, how that might be perceived by someone else. In that case, I would err more to the formal, which is why I want to talk for just a moment about familiarity versus formality. Lori and I were talking a little bit about this, so correct me if I get any of this wrong. But in email, I think it's better when you don't know somebody to start more on the formal side of things if you're really unsure. In many cases, I would feel comfortable emailing Lori because we've been speaking and she's been referred to me as Lori. I might then say, "Dear Lori, it's a pleasure to be working with you on XYZ." That's just fine. The way someone signs an email will tell you a lot about how they'd like to be referred to. If I signed mine as Anna Post, you're probably going to then be calling me Ms. Post. That would be a wise thing to do. If I sign it Anna, that's tacit approval to write back to me as Anna. Lori brought up with me the excellent point in the medical world of titles and the scientific world of titles. And after we talked for a little bit, my recommendation to all of you would be to check somebody's signature block at the bottom first, because if you do choose to be formal with them, you wouldn't want to write back to Lori as Ms. Conlon. She's actually not. In that case, she's Dr. Conlon in the professional world here. And so it's a good idea to pay attention to that. However, I've also, per our conversations, been told that in the non-medical world, the default is often to the first name. That if you're introduced as Lori Conlon, that's kind of permission to me, Anna, to call you Lori. If you were introduced to me as Dr. Conlon, then yes, I would call you Dr. Conlon. And I actually, in this case, might refer some questions to Lori if anybody has questions, because this is a different culture here that I'm working within. In business, the question of titles doesn't tend to come up as often in general corporate business. Does everybody feel comfortable with that one right there? Yes?
We're not in the medical research world, and a woman's clearly not a doctor. You've never met with Ms. or Mrs.
Great question. Ms., MS, always. Even if you know they're married, go with Ms. because they may not actually go by their married name in the business world. So always Ms., MS. Great question. I'm glad you asked that one. Yes, right here.
I'm more concerned about familiarity with formality is how you sign off of the email. And I've been trying to read a lot lately to see what the most appropriate methods for signing off, like best regards, best. Like there's a new thing that everybody's been doing is cheers.
Salutations and closings. No, it's great. It's perfect. Perfect question. No, that's okay. It's the perfect lead into it. So how do you do a professional closing?
Sincerely or best regards.
Sincerely, best regards are great. Cheers and warmly are fine if you know them well. Otherwise, no. I think those are far too personal. But those are the more personal, warm version, warmly, I mean, sorry, no pun intended, of being able to say that in the business world if you would like to be very friendly with someone that you know very well. Otherwise, I like sincerely, I like kind regards, I like best wishes, are all thanks again, I think are all very appropriate ways to sign off on an email. Do have a greeting, dear, hello, dear all, hello everyone, hi Ms. Conlon. I wouldn't do hi Ms. Conlon, I might do hi Lori, but I'd probably do dear Ms. Conlon or hello Ms. Conlon. With folks. Do have those on your first email back and forth, maybe the second one, and then after that you can kind of drop it off, but don't just start an email, Lori, what time do you want me at the presentation? Hi Lori, what time do you want me at the presentation? Thanks, Anna. That's what should be added on instead. But once those chains get back into like 15 long, no, you don't have to do that back and forth on every single one. It can drop off a little more naturally. So we've done salutations and closings. I want to talk about cell phones and BlackBerries. All right, I just want to keep an eye on the clock. We started a couple minutes late, but I don't want to run over for all of you. Cell phones, be in control of it. Bottom line, technology is a tool that is absolutely wonderful. I am asked all the time in interviews, very frequently. I've done a number of them recently on technology with Twitter coming up and Facebook having its most recent changes. And people have been asking me a lot, don't you just think that cell phones are really rude? Or doesn't etiquette just say that, having BlackBerries isn't that just the worst thing to happen to etiquette since Emily was around? No, not necessarily. Or don't you just hate those since you're an etiquette expert? Not at all. I like my cell phone very, very much. I like using Facebook. I don't use Twitter and have a BlackBerry, but I think they're really handy tools that serve a good purpose in business. Question, again, goes to how we choose to use them. That's what makes the difference. These are tools that we can use to our advantage, or if we use them poorly, it can be making a bad impression on other people. And being aware, those situations we talked about earlier, about how it might be affecting others, will help us to know the difference between the two. Calling Lori to let her know that I might be running late because of traffic, which didn't happen, but if it did, on her cell phone, good use of a cell phone to let you know as soon as possible that there's a problem. Bad use of a cell phone is taking a call in a meeting, even if you, have it kind of quiet and, say, oh, excuse me, actually that might be a little bit of a better one. I'll tell you why in a moment. But the point being that you're talking to the client afterwards and you say, hold on, I'm getting a call after a meeting. That's not the right time. Your time needs to be with the person you're scheduled to be with. The reason I corrected myself right there is because if you are in a situation, as I said to all of you in here at the beginning, if you have to have it on for a particular reason that is important to the business at hand, let people know that it's on, put it on silent or vibrate. When the call comes, excuse yourself and go take it outside. This way you're not being disruptive and you've let people know in advance that this could happen so they're not offended when it does come up. They're prepared for this. I would use this judiciously though, not for every single call that you get from your kids, for example. Beware of using a BlackBerry in a meeting, and I mean non-emergency calls, obviously. Beware of using a BlackBerry in a meeting. Why? Because when you're on the BlackBerry and you're sitting here and you're under the table, one, it doesn't look very good. What if I was doing this while I'm presenting to you? Yeah, it looks kind of ridiculous. On top of which, clearly, it looks ridiculous in this kind of a situation. But also, you're not giving your full attention to the person that you're there to be with. And when that happens, I think you're failing to also give them your respect. Because I think that giving someone attention is a way of giving them your respect. Remember the beginning I said, with the little kid example and the parent, show me some respect. Giving somebody your attention is a way, I think, of demonstrating respect. And therefore, when you're on the BlackBerry, I think it's a little bit of a failure to be able to do that. That's why I find it offensive, not because a BlackBerry in and of itself is wrong or bad. Your voice is your image. We talked about this a minute ago in terms of an email. In person on the phone, when you are not in person and you are on the phone, you don't have the facial language, you don't have the body gestures that you might be giving to somebody to give them a greater sense of your meaning. Instead, you just have tone, you have speed, not speaking too quickly or too slowly, which actually can also be annoying. The inflection you chose to place on words, these can add greatly to the wealth of meaning of what you mean to say. I also want to mention on here, laughter, accent, and pronunciation. It doesn't mean that it's wrong to have an accent or that laughter is wrong. Laughter can actually be a very good tool for people who sound stern or severe on the phone. Smiling when you speak to somebody automatically makes your voice gentler and kinder. I have no idea what the reason behind that is, but I can tell you it's a tool frequently used by managers to encourage employees who have difficulty with this. I remember at an office I worked at once, the boss walked by and leaned down to a woman who just hung up the phone and said, remember to smile when you're on the phone. So that can come through and be conveyed to another person. With an accent, it's not wrong to have one, whether it's a foreign accent or a regional accent where you speak the native language. But be aware that if you have one, you may need to speak a little bit more slowly and enunciate your words a little more clearly so that people can hear you when you're on the phone and so that you're not being asked to repeat yourself. Pronunciation of words mostly just speaks to how well you understand the subject matter at home. This is usually for place names or personal names, people's names. It's worth finding out the correct pronunciation of these so that you can look like you know what you're talking about. You don't want to walk in and start speaking to somebody pronouncing their name wrong the whole time. You don't have to know it before. I do recommend finding out if you're unsure. If somebody pronounces your name incorrectly through no fault of their own because it's just a different pronunciation than usual, or it's a confusing pronunciation, is it Alyssa or Elisa? Sometimes you just don't know. If it's your own name, it's okay to correct someone else. And it's okay to correct them more than once if they continue to get it wrong. I had somebody once call me Stephanie 6 times in one meeting. I gave up after about number 3 and just let it go because I knew I wasn't getting anywhere. I wasn't very impressed with her, but I wasn't going to keep trying to fix that one at that point. But your name's very personal. It's okay to ask to have it correct. What's the #1 complaint that workers identify about coworkers in a cubicle or open office environment? This was a poll done by the Boston Globe. Talking too loudly on the phone. Yeah, I think it does come up on your presentation. But anyway, speaking too loudly on the telephone was the #1 thing that came up. You know, I would extend this also to things like the use of other noises that could come up, like the use of radios, etc. I'm not sure how that works. I know that you all have some workspace, and I know that a lot of you also work in labs. I would say in terms of that, know where you are, whether or not that's acceptable, to have your cell phone on to take a call, or to be taking a loud call there. One, in the first place, monitor your voice if you are taking calls, but should you even be doing it in the first place in an open office environment? And also things like music in an open office environment are things to be aware that it could affect others, and know what the policy is, whether or not that particular culture there is okay with it or not before just flipping on a radio or flipping on some music. Perfect, right here. I thought this was coming up. I work in an open office environment. Recently, I was expecting an important call from my doctor. I left my cell phone on so I could get the call. When it rang, someone shouted, "Turn your phone off." What should I have done? This was a real question emailed into us. Should have had it on vibrate and gone to a private place to take the call. Pretty obvious with that one. I would also know whether or not that's even acceptable in your office to be doing that, whether they would prefer that you take it on a regular line, whether they would prefer that you make those calls on your own time at lunch. I think that's pretty severe. Usually a doctor is pretty reasonable reason to be taking a phone call, but the key here is to move away to a private place. Whether or not you're comfortable with someone hearing this information, I had a young woman ask this once. She said, "Well, I don't really care if other people hear that. Why were they so upset? I don't mind." I said, "Well, it's not really about you. Other workers don't necessarily want to hear these personal details of your life. It doesn't matter whether you're comfortable with them knowing it. I might not be comfortable hearing that about you." So that's another consideration in an open office environment, just to keep everybody getting along. Because let's face it, we don't always choose our coworkers. You know, we get to choose the people that we spend time with on our own. We don't always get to pick the people that we work with, and we tend to spend a lot of time with them. You know, work pretty long hours. Yes?
I think I kind of missed that point, because it's understandable what you should have done in hindsight, but at that particular moment, someone is cursing at you.
Good point.
Appropriate office behavior either, so then how do you deal with it?
You know, once you're done with the call, because it's obviously ringing in that moment, you can't do something. Immediately, I would go over to them, and I might say, you know, I'm sorry I left the ringer on. It might have been unintentional. Maybe you meant to have it on vibrate. You know, I apologize. I shouldn't have had the ringer on. Be willing to accept your own part of the mistake in this. But then say, you know, I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't use language like that, though. Or please don't use language like that, though. I thought that was a little severe for the situation. Or if it's not appropriate for you to talk to that person because of the way some management structure works, go to your manager, present it, and say, you know, I shouldn't have done this, but I don't like this kind of language, and I thought you should know. It's going to depend on your management structure which way you do this. Some companies have pretty particular rules about how you handle this with a equal level coworker. Others don't. In most cases, I think you could just address it. You know, I'm sorry, but in future, please don't use the profanity. Something like that. That's okay, because I think that's a question of having respect for yourself as well, as we said earlier. Okay, good question. Thank you. I'm just going to pop this up in the interest of time. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I think this is pretty obvious. It's easy to forget to do this, though, and it can be annoying when you get a message and you don't have the info that you need. End of story. That's about it. So, in the interest of time, let's move on to image and attire. This goes back to a little bit of what we were saying at the beginning. If people focus negatively on any of these things that are within your control to use, then the focus is going to go to that rather than to the good business. So in my mind, I just think that then your image needs polishing so that you can get to the point where people are focusing on the business instead. So with that said, let's take a look at appearance. We'll talk about all 3 of these. Let's pop all of these up on the board at once. Neat clothing, tidy, clean. Things shouldn't be wrinkled, torn, sloppy, sweaters fraying, things like that in the business world. Wash, no stains, no odor. That's both your clothing and you. The expectation in the U.S. Is that people will be using good hygiene and you will not be smelling their body odor. That's the standard here. It's a reasonable expectation here. With regards to some tips up here for clothing. Not too tight, too short, too low cut, too loud, too high, too sheer. DC is a very conservative city. I don't see anything too much usually going on with anything here. The only thing I'll let you know is that I'm not speaking just to women here. I have seen men break every single one of these, including too sheer. I saw a man come to a business meeting once with a mesh shirt on underneath a jacket. A business meeting, yes, I'm getting a puzzled frown over here, and that's exactly how the rest of us felt. What on earth were you thinking that this was appropriate? Understated, minimal jewelry, things like this. In no way do I ever want to convey that this doesn't mean that you can't express your own personal style. I think that you can do that and also still meet these criteria. Again, know your situation. If I was speaking to the art director of a university, and for her, she always wears, really terrific, loud, beautiful, stunning showpiece jewelry. This is part of her deal as a very artistic person in the culture she's in. In that case, I would disregard what's up here. But on a whole, when you don't know who you might be meeting with or the impression you might need to make, I would err more on the side of caution. Minimal scents, many offices are going with no scent policies because it is causing problems among coworkers, either not liking it, getting headaches, being bothered, etc., either for men or for women, perfume or cologne. Dressing for the situation, as I just mentioned, in many cases, you're going to have to augment how casual or how formal you need to be, how expressive of your own personality you could be versus how much you might need to rein that in a little bit. I can tell you that I don't wander around the streets of Burlington usually wearing a suit, but I'm coming out to do business, so I put it on, but yet I chose one that I like, not one that I feel is what I had to do. I found a way to compromise between the two. I think that is very possible. So, does anybody have any questions on appearance before I move on? There was one thing that was mentioned to me for the culture that we're in right here, and that was lab coats. It was a question that goes back almost to our sneeze comment, and it was a new one for me. This was something new that I just learned. And whether or not you choose to wear a lab coat outside of the lab is up to you. But I was told that it can be perceived as a little bit questionable, that people may not have they may have an impression of it that who knows what's on that lab coat. This was totally new to me. It would never occur to me in my world that a lab coat is worn for protection and that there might actually be matter, residue, something, chemicals, whatever you were working with on that lab coat. I don't say this to judge one way or the other. Instead, I say this to let you know a perception that could be out there, an image you could be sending if you choose to. And so I would just say, take that into account before you make your choice, yes or no, not to do that. Be aware of the message it could send. So again, I want you to know I'm not judging, but it's only fair I tell you that somebody might feel that way about it. So with that being said, professional attire or appearance, essentially, I feel pretty comfortable that we've talked about this one up top here. Dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Does that mean that if you are in an entry level where the corporate culture, I think these two go hand in hand, where the corporate culture is to wear blue jeans, and a casual sweater, that you show up in a three-piece suit? No, it doesn't. I think it means that we dress just a little bit of a notch up to show that this is important to us and we want to check any box on making a good impression that's possible. But I think most importantly is to dress within the culture of the workplace that you're in, to pay respect to that that you're not being very, very sloppy in an office that's a little bit more formal, or vice versa. My Uncle John used to work for, he just retired, for Ben & Jerry's in Vermont and for the state of Vermont. And my aunt always knew which job he was going to, which day of the week, because when he would go to Ben & Jerry's, he usually wore, jeans and maybe a button-down, or jeans and a sweater. And when he went to the state of Vermont, he was, in a suit and a tie. And he was shifting a little bit of himself to be able to be respectful for the other people who are there as well, to show basically that you get it in that culture, within that community at work. Some actions up here. We said that all of these things create image, your actions and your appearance. So actions up here, body language, the way that you stand. This is often considered very, very defensive. It doesn't mean that you can't ever cross your arms, though. But it could also be very bad posture, or the constant need, if I stood here the whole time and this was how I stood, that's an opportunity for me to present an image to you that I have control over, and I want to use it well. So posture's there. Eye contact is a sign of confidence. It's also a sign of recognition, a sign of greeting. So you don't want to be staring into somebody's eyes the whole time so that it's uncomfortable, but you also need to be able to make eye contact with someone. Nervous habits, if I was twirling my hair the whole time, I might not even know I'm doing it, but it might be distracting and maybe look a little unprofessional. Quality of voice matters. I put this here because I think it fits really well with image. I'm not going to recover it since we discussed it already under cell phone usage and phone voice. But I will just add here, I think it just completes the package, though, for image and attire. The good communicator is also a good listener. That half of communicating is being able to perceive what someone else is saying to you rather than just getting your own message across. We saw that earlier in some of the difficult situations that we looked at. So networking. Networking can come up whether you're at more of a business social situation or perhaps it's even just within the confines of the office place. Respects the opinions and the time of others. I think that it's a lot about building relationships whether or not you know that there might be business coming out of it. It's just an opportunity to see what could come, that it's not a quid pro quo where it's like, oh, well, I passed on that reference to you, so now I need a favor. That's not really how it works. It's much more of just a very, very casual, very undefined way of getting to know others. I think that the ineffective networker is name-dropping, bragging about connections, sort of being very big and showy. It's something that needs to be very genuine for it to be working well. And you don't need to over-network either, promising all kinds of things. Sometimes it's just chatting with somebody about what's going on in their industry, and that's all. That could even just be networking, where it's not a specific colleague. A couple of ways to network when you're out and about in the business world. You might be meeting for a bite to eat. Sometimes corporations will have tickets to an event. You might say, they're not a client of yours, but you might say, listen, I thought you might like to go. We have some extra tickets. Would you like them? It's just being able to check in with somebody every now and then. Things like birthday cards, that's if you know them really well. That's not for just anybody. Use your judgment on which of these you think is appropriate for the situation. But these are some tools at your disposal to be able to build relationships with people that you may not have a formalized business connection to. Business social events. Why introductions matter. The first thing that will happen at a business social event is that you'll be introduced or you'll be introducing yourself to someone else. First impressions, it is true. They really can make or break. It really sets in somebody's mind what they remember about you, especially if they only have a few moments. And so therefore, I think it's an opportunity to do this well, to make a good impression. It can give clues about your confidence, and we'll see why right up here. The first step to an introduction, don't worry, you were fine. We're in like a seated environment here. But the first step to an introduction is to stand up, to meet someone at eye level. Disability, obviously, is an exception to that. If you're stuck behind a table, maybe at a restaurant, just do that little half-up gesture in business to show that you'd make the gesture if you could. Look the person in the eyes and smile. The ability to look them in the eye recognizes them. It shows recognition that I know you're here. It's a sign of confidence to that person, and smiling is a sign of welcome to them. Firm handshake, so not like the crushing handshake that shows how powerful you are in business, but not that limp fish, dead fish handshake that you hear about either. Just nice full contact. About the amount of pressure, guys worry about this sometimes because they don't want to crush women's hands, about the amount of pressure you need to open a refrigerator door. That's about how much of a squeeze you should give somebody, so not too much. 1 or 2 pumps of the hand, not 10 or 20. Kind of a thing. And that whole putting the hand over the hand, that's a very personal gesture, so unless you know them well, I would avoid that one. And then say the person's name. One, as a sign of recognition that you're paying attention, but mostly it's just a mnemonic device if you're meeting a lot of people to help you remember. Order of introduction. There used to be a lot of formalities to who was introduced to whom, when, and how, and it's pretty simple now. If you feel that there's some kind of hierarchy, if you will, to the situation, speak to the person that you think is either the more senior person, the more important, if you will, although I might also say honored. I think it's a little bit less of a judgy word. The more honored person. So you might say, you know, Mr. Client. You might feel that they're the person to really honor in this situation. I'd like to introduce you to our senior partner. When you speak to the person you're honoring first, the rest of the language falls out into place. So just if you think about it that way, you don't have to worry about who's who goes where. Speak to the person you'd like to honor first, and the rest will work. Forgetting a person's name, admit you did it. You can't help it. Everybody's going to know because you can't say the name when you go to make the introduction. It's pretty simple. Just apologize for it and then move on. I'm so sorry. I'm blanking on your name. Please remind me. Lori. Lori, I'd like you to meet Krista. There you go. You're done. Whatever you might do, please forgive me. I don't know why I'm forgetting right now. I'm sorry. I'm confusing your name. Whatever you might like to say to do it, just try not to keep doing it after that. After this, you really need to remember Lori's name. That's pretty important, or you run the risk of offending her. Approaching strangers. A couple of things I'm going to put up all at once here just to keep us going. Approaching where you know somebody else makes it a little bit softer landing on you coming into a situation if you don't know people. Do try to make it a smooth introduction rather than a jarring interruption. So a more natural break in the conversation with people. Catching eye contact is a good way because that's that recognition again. Okay, now this person knows that I'm here. Perfect moment to now speak. So catching an eye really helps. And then establishing connections. I like using where you work or a reference, a division, something like that. Some way to start to figure out where each of you are on the map, and then how you might start to bridge that is the conversation that comes to find your connections in business. Small talk, because the whole point of business social events is that you're not just there to talk shop the whole time. Otherwise, we would just set up meetings all the time. So with this, become familiar with some various topics, things that are comfortable to you. I can guarantee you all my friends would agree that I won't pick sports because somebody asked a follow-up question and I'm absolutely lost. I don't know anything about it. But have some current events that you can talk about, something maybe from the paper that day. Google is a great way. Find out some information about your hosts so that you can start to, again, this is all about putting people on the map. You know, I heard that you guys were opening up an office in Dallas. You know, it turns out that we have blah, blah, blah going there. Now you have a conversation. Or maybe you don't. You just say, I heard you were opening up an office in Dallas. Tell me more about that. It gives you a place to start. Asking people their opinions does two things. If you're nervous, they get to talk for a minute now, and you get to listen. A little bit easier on you. You can pick from what they say. You can then direct the conversation in a direction that's comfortable for you. Oh, they mentioned something about this hobby that they have. Oh, well, I know something about that. We'll pick that as the conversation piece I want to lead from. That, and people also just quite frankly like to talk about their opinions, so it's a good way to get folks chatting. Listening to others, we've just talked about, good listener. A good communicator is a good listener. Practice. By that, I don't mean go home to your spouse or to your roommate or to whomever and say, okay, let's practice small talk now. No, that's not what I mean. What I mean instead is practice with folks like taxi drivers. They're my #1 favorite to do this with. If you're not in a situation where you're taking a lot of taxis, people that you may have small interactions with in your day-to-day life, somebody checking you out, oh, you know, great weather today. Whatever it might be, something simple, something small, where it's a non-pressure situation, and it's going to be a short situation. You're attending a business social event. You've been speaking with a person who's monopolizing your time. You simply can't seem to end the conversation. You would do what? I like to keep it short and sweet. I've heard all the excuses under the book from, oh, I have to go to the bathroom, oh, I have to get a drink. Well, I've then had people raise their hand when I teach and say, yeah, I had somebody follow me. I wasn't advocating these were just solutions people were volunteering. I've heard of them going into the bathroom with them, of, oh, I need a drink too, and then you haven't gotten rid of the person. Oh, introduce them to somebody else. Oh, well, that person's not going to thank you for getting dumped with this person. That's not a very nice thing to do to them. My favorite is just to keep it simple. Just as simple. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, if you'll excuse me. That's it. That's all. Say it with a smile. Look them in the eye so they don't feel offended. But that's it. I'm also okay in most situations with, if you'll excuse me, I see somebody over here I have to speak with. I would use have to speak with rather than would like to speak with, because that states preference. I'd rather be speaking to them. If you don't mind, I'll see you later. That's the message that could be inherent behind it or perceived behind it. I prefer saying, if you'll excuse me, I have to talk to them. My only caveat with that is that every once in a while, no matter how nicely you say it, somebody may feel that they're being slighted. That's why I prefer the simplest. I think that's the best chance of not offending another person. Because you don't want to be stuck here. I don't want to be stuck there, that's for sure. Controversial topics. This is very similar in some cases to dealing with a difficult person. Staying neutral, sticking to facts, being willing, I think, in this case, in a more social situation, being willing to swallow the last word or to not go there at all in the first place. To say, you know, somebody says, oh, what do you think about the constitutional right to bear arms, is an example that somebody emailed us once, or whatever it might be, something very, very controversial, hot topic issue. I might say, ooh, you know, that one's pretty heated. I'd rather not go there. It's okay to address it directly if you want to. There are situations where I think we're expected to have an opinion, and if you feel the need to get into this, or if you're thrown into it and you're startled by it, I think one of the keys is to get back out of it. If it is starting to get heated, be willing to swallow that last word. I think that's more important to the relationship. No matter how right you might be. These ones I'm going to pop up in the interest of time. I think many of them are fairly self-explanatory, but I also think they're also very worth noticing. One of the biggest ones that I will mention here is to avoid gossip. It looks very unprofessional out and about, and I would also like to highlight the temptation to socialize just with colleagues. At a business social event, maybe there's some cocktails, things like this. The reason it's business social and not just happy hour is because you are there to make some connections with other people. In terms of following a one drink or no drink rule, know what your limit is, set it before you get there, and stick to it. Don't decide you can have another after you've had 3, because the last thing you want to do in business is apologize for something you did while you were drunk. Not good. So in terms of following up, the follow-up thank you note, if somebody does something for you in business, a gift, they take you out to dinner, things like this, do send a handwritten note. I'd recommend as soon as possible, the next day. If that's not possible, within the next few days, whatever is reasonable. They don't have to be very long. Do mention something specific to it. Don't just say, hi, dear John, thank you very much. That was very kind of you. Best, Anna. No. Dear John, thank you very much. That was very lovely. Dinner the other evening, it was a pleasure to hear about blah, 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 blah. I look forward to speaking more with you soon. Best, Anna. Nice and short, but something particular. I like handwritten best for bigger things, major events, beginnings of client relationships, when something is new or more formal. For every single lunch you ever go to, no. Judge the formality, judge the specialness of the occasion. You can send an email or, excuse me, make a phone call instead if you feel that's better, or you can do both. I just dropped a note in the mail, but I know you're going on vacation. Thanks again for last night. Talk to you in 2 weeks, and send an email that way. It's okay to do both. But for gifts, physical gifts, always a handwritten thank you note. Last thing to put up here for job interviews, be on time. We've talked a lot about how crucial that is in making impressions today. Dress one notch up. It's okay to call a company and find out what the dress code is there, but it's important to be very respectful and aware of that dress code when you go into a place where you're looking to work, to show that you get it. We've talked about the good introduction. Make sure that you practice that in an interview, to stand up. If somebody else comes in to join the interview 20 minutes in, you still stand up and shake that person's hand, and then you both sit down. Be prepared with some specific questions for your interviewer, and know the questions that they may be asking of you as well. But when they turn around and say, so do you have any questions for me? The answer is, yes, I do. And then you have a couple of questions that show that you're intelligent and aware about the position you're there and seeking. And the last is to write a thank you note to each person that you interview with. This is very important. This is a great way to follow up. It shows that you're thorough. It shows that you're professional. It shows that you're thoughtful, attentive. It sends a lot of good signals. Will you fail to get a job if you don't send one? No, plenty of people probably have. But I can tell you, it's so competitive right now. Any little piece that can set you apart will help, and this is a really, really great one to do. Some people even have them placed into a file. I did that at the MPAA. People who had interviewed for jobs, even ones that we didn't accept, we might pull out their file 6 months later looking for a new position, and then I see that thank you note. What a great thing. I probably might not have remembered it, but now I just saw it again. Nice reminder to have. The 24/7 professional. The idea here is that your work life could come into your personal life unexpectedly. So know that actions outside of work could affect you. That social situations, you might have to shift gears for a few minutes if you run into a colleague while you're out for drinks with your spouse, your partner, your friends, whoever it might be. Doesn't mean you sacrifice your whole night, but you may have to kind of shift between the two for just a moment. Maintain the highest level of professional conduct at off-site venues. It's not always that you're on a client location or out on business travel. It might be instead that you're at another division. You want to still be, you're in this case, the quiet, silent +1 isn't necessarily the company, it's your division. You want them to be proud of you while you're out and about interacting with other areas within a company or a division, or excuse me, or an institute. The last thing that I'll say here is to use the principles, regardless of what other people think. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think that they will always serve you well. I think that they'll serve you well both in your, we're all set, this is the wrap up here, both in your professional lives, but I think also in your personal lives well. I think that it's hard to argue that anybody wouldn't like to be treated with consideration, with respect, with honesty. I don't think that you also have to sacrifice other agendas or priorities to be able to do that, and I think the benefits are tremendous. So I'd like to thank all of you for being here. We ran over just a little bit on time, but I liked all the conversation on the difficult questions, so I wanted to let that go. I will be here to answer more, but I understand we've only got about, oh, raffle, that's right. We've only got about 3 minutes for questions instead of 10, but I'm happy to stay longer if anybody would like to. I know that you all have schedules to keep to, though. But I would like to thank you for coming this morning bright and early to hear about etiquette, and I would also like to wish you a lot of success in your careers and in your studies, your endeavors. And thank you very much for having me here. So what we'll do now, if any of you have to go, that's quite okay. I believe you all received a raffle ticket as you came in. Did anybody not get a raffle ticket? Right over here. Okay, we have a couple over here. Actually, if you want to give me a few, I'll run up over here. What we have down here are a couple of different books from the Institute that I brought with me from our selection. We've got over 20. We do kids books. We do books for business. We do books for weddings. We've got 6 different ones in wedding. Whole bunch of different things. And we will raffle off 4 of them. I think we have our big book of etiquette, which is sort of the very classic standard that keeps getting updated. It's a reference book. And it covers all different kinds of things, weddings, social, funerals, business, children, you name it. And let's see, we also have Essential Manners for Men, which was written by my dad, Peter. It's a New York Times bestseller. It's really fun. It's not a reference book so much. It's more of a cover-to-cover read. And my dad is a very normal guy, let's put it that way. And so it's kind of fun to read some of the anecdotes in there. We also have, if there's any golfers in the room, everybody have one up here? Okay. We also have a book that he just put out on golf etiquette, which has been really pretty popular. Thank you. Did you need a ticket?
Oh, I thought you put it back. Oh,
there you go.
No.
And then the last one is called Excuse Me, But I Was Next, which covers, again, a whole range of subjects, just like our reference book does, but it's a bit more of a fun read. This is like the real stuff that people email in more in the non-business world. You know, how do you break up with your hairdresser? Can you re-gift? You'll have to read the book. How do you re-gift a present? Can you re-gift a present in the first place? You know, if your kid has a play date and you don't like the parents of the other kid, how do you arrange that, but they're best friends? So it's a lot of those kinds of situations that are in there, which is pretty fun. I think there's one stuck right there. So the first one will be for the big book, the big blue book of etiquette. And we will pull out ticket ending in the last 4 numbers, 6942. 6942? Anybody? Right here? All right. There you go. That is for you. And this one will be for, you know what, we'll do the golf, I'll do the golf book, but if somebody that I pick here is not a golfer, doesn't want to give it as a gift, you can pick one of the other books. How about we do that? Because golf's kind of a specific title. Yeah, re-gift. Yeah, re-gift that one. You can read exactly how to do it correctly, and excuse me. Ticket ending in the last 4 digits, 6970. Right over there. Do you mind just coming on down to the end of the row right there? Would you like the golf book to give to somebody? Okay. Great. I just don't want to assume everybody in the room is a golfer. I'm not a golfer, by the way. There you go. Thanks. Yeah, I was not on the editing team for that one. Okay, so we'll do the same thing with the men's manners book, just in case a woman gets it and does not wish to have the men's manners book. Although it is actually pretty funny. I got a kick out of reading it. Ending in the last 4 digits, 6980. Right there, all right. Would you like the men's manners book? Or would you like the excuse me book? You pick. Well, I just didn't want to assume that you would like a men's book. But it's up to you. Which would you like? It makes a good gift, too.
Yeah. I think
Yes.
this one.
There you go.
Okay.
All right. And the very last one for Excuse Me, But I Was Next, which is one of my favorites. These are all actually, I picked my favorites for you guys. Ends in 6936. Anybody? 69, maybe they had to go. 6936, going once, going twice? Okay, it's gone. Ending in 6950. Yes, up here, all right. Terrific.
3 more questions.
There you go. Yep. Any questions? Okay, I'm happy to stay if anyone has one they'd like to come down. Thanks again, guys. Have a good day.